Hello, my name is Alicia, and welcome to my Unnoticed Evil channel. Today I'm going to be talking about compliments that are insults in disguise, and why it is they can be more harmful than direct insults. If you like the content of this video, you may click subscribe for more discussions on the hidden forms of evil in culture. Now, you may have heard of flattery, those annoying compliments that are rather meaningless, insincere, and tend to come with ulterior motives. Backhanded compliments can be worse. They are insults in disguise. They can be more derogatory than direct insults, and they can be more cruel than direct insults. Backhanded compliments can be intentional or unintentional. When they're unintentional, they may come with prejudices in one's psyche that one may not be aware of. People can have certain inner prejudices that they're just not aware of, and they may deliver something that they think is a compliment, but it may actually be an insult with underlying prejudice. Examples include benevolent racism and benevolent sexism. Sometimes, however, the backhanded compliments are actually intentional. The individual actually does intend to put down the other person and to do so in a way that makes it look like they're not being mean at all. When people insult us, we tend to feel disrespected. When people insult us directly, however, at least they are leveling with us. They're being frank. And they're basically saying, I think low of you in some way. When an insult is masked as a compliment, however, and the person expects us to take it as a compliment, then what the person is saying is, not only do I think low of you, I expect you to have the same low opinion of yourself. As a very classic example, let us say a white person calls a black person articulate. This may seem like a compliment, but in certain contexts where the compliment is laced with an underlying racism, the true message can be, I expect black people to be uneducated, have lower vocabulary, and be inarticulate. You are better at expressing yourself than I expected. Now, if you expect a black person to take this compliment as a compliment and actually be flattered, then what you are saying is, not only do I expect you to have a low vocabulary range, I expect you to have the same low expectations of yourself. And so you can see that in certain ways, a compliment that is an insult in disguise can actually be more derogatory than if it were delivered as a direct insult. As an illustration, there are big differences between a true compliment and an insult masked as a compliment. The true compliment tends to bring somebody up in some way. So when one person calls another person articulate, in a normal context, what it is saying is that you are better at expressing yourself than the average person. You are better at putting your thoughts into words than the average person. This essentially elevates you from where you were before to a higher level. It builds you up. When an insult is delivered masked as a compliment, however, it doesn't build you up until it brings you way down first. So let us say that the white person calls the black person articulate, and that compliment is laced with a hidden racism. Then what the white person is saying is, well, because you're a black person, I expect you to have a low vocabulary range, not be very good at expressing yourself, use foul language. Effectively, that brings a black person way down to a lower level, as you can see with the blue arrow there. But then you see next to the downward blue arrow, a red arrow that goes up. And that part is the part where the white person says, you're not as bad as I thought you were. But you can see that while the insult masked as a compliment eventually brings the person up, the person is still at a lower level than he started at before. And that is where it still is an insult. Now, insults masked as compliments can be more cruel than direct insults because they make it more difficult for the victim to defend himself without looking unreasonable to others present. Essentially, it places the victim the burden of having to explain why the statement is so derogatory. And this burden is rather convenient for the one that is delivering the insult. It makes the one delivering the insult be able to better get away with it without any accountability. Now, you may have heard of some suggested comebacks to these insults masked as compliments. Like, for example, may be encouraged to say, well, what do you mean by that? Explain. But this may not work. In the case of the white person calling a black person articulate, the white person may just say, I'm just saying you're articulate. What's wrong with that? Isn't that good? And certainly, sometimes people do call other people articulate, and it is a true compliment. And so this is why it is so hard for the victim to defend himself against insults masked as compliments. A single expression can be a compliment in one context and a derogatory insult in another context. Now, there are many other examples of insults masked as compliments. Let us say that you are a lawyer at a law firm, and one of your colleagues says that your one strength is that you are a nice person. Subliminal message is, you have no notable talents. Now, if you were to try to stand up for yourself and insist that being nice is not your only strength, it may look like you are greedily fishing for more compliments. Essentially, this comment makes you look more incompetent than you did before. Now, mean people can easily enjoy the convenience of putting others down while getting away with it, and delivering an insult masked as a compliment is a pretty easy way of putting somebody down without it looking like you're being mean at all. Now, another example of an insult disguised as a compliment. Let us say that there is an amputee or somebody in a wheelchair who's loading their groceries into the trunk of their car as usual, and somebody walks by and says, "You are tough." Well, this can be rather derogatory because what essentially is saying to the disabled person is, "I am surprised that you can function normally." Now, any attempt by the disabled person to stand up for himself can be perceived as being ungrateful, bothered by nothing, bitter, easily agitated. So essentially, this comment, which is an insult in disguise, makes it difficult for the victim to explain why the comment is so offensive. Another example of a statement is, "You have a mind of your own." Now, this can be a true compliment in some context and a derogatory insult in other contexts. Where it can be a true compliment or an insult depends on what triggered the compliment. For example, in some context, a person may rise above the groupthink beliefs, adopt their own beliefs independently with their own independent reasoning, despite what others around them think. And so in this context, if you tell that person that he or she has a mind of his or her own, it is a true compliment. What it's saying is that you have the ability to think for yourself, and not everybody does that. But let's take another context. Let us say that a young woman named Sheila has an aunt who tells Sheila to do something that Sheila just doesn't think is a good idea. Sheila refuses to do what her aunt tells her to do because she thinks it's a bad idea, to which her aunt replies, "Well, you really have a mind of your own, and you are quite rebellious." Well, there are a couple of things going on here. To start, what triggered the compliment? Well, all Sheila needed to do to get this compliment was express disagreement. Well, most people have at some point in their lifetimes expressed some disagreement. And, in fact, even cats and dogs have a mind of their own to some extent. Sometimes when a cat or dog is put into a cage, it bares its claws. It rebels. Because it does have a mind of its own. So to say you have a mind of your own just because a person expressed a simple disagreement essentially reduces a person to the level of an animal. It is very derogatory. Now, on another note, why is Sheila's aunt calling Sheila rebellious? Rebellious is not a label we would give to someone who is disagreeing with an equal. But we may describe somebody as rebellious who is disagreeing with an authority figure who is not meant to be questioned. And so effectively, when Sheila's aunt calls Sheila rebellious because of simple disagreement, Sheila's aunt may be elevating herself and appointing herself as an authority figure who is not meant to be questioned. And so you can see where, in certain contexts, when somebody is told that he or she has a mind of his or her own, it can reduce them to the level of an animal, be very derogatory. And when it is derogatory, it's most often targeted at young females, with the idea that the young females are supposed to be so beautiful that it's hard to believe that they have a brain too. Now, sometimes flattery is really more meant to build up the flatterer rather than the one being flattered. As an example, let us say Peggy showers her colleague Jenny with compliments on her achievements. What Peggy is really thinking is, "I am the humble one. I never say anything positive about myself because I am just so humble." On the other hand, I believe overachievers, like Jenny, are prideful and arrogant. And so you can see here that Peggy, by delivering to Jenny all these compliments, essentially is establishing herself as a humble one and Jenny as the arrogant one. Now, in all these contexts, the perpetrator always wants us to think that it is just an innocent compliment, regardless of the harmful effects. So, as defenses against these insults, masses, compliments, of course, you may have heard, well, just ask them what they mean by that. Ask them to explain themselves. But another thing, you could always just say, I know that sounds like a compliment, but it has a derogatory undertone. Perhaps in the comments, you can mention other ideas about how to deal with insults, masses, compliments, and how to defend oneself.